Hi and welcome to this episode of Concise Conversations featuring Armin Fendrich. Armin has got a long and varied career in the tech industry, and he currently runs a boutique consultancy firm where he advises and invests in early stage startups. Armin's career has basically mirrored the entire tech industry, where he started in engineering and infrastructure, then he moved into hardware, then into software, and finally when he became the managing director of RideCell in Munich, he moved into connected services. We talked to Armin about his time in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom and bust, and we also talked to him about his pre-industry days as a semi-professional musician. And finally, we get to know Armin just a little bit better with the Concise Conversations first 8 questions.
Concise Conversations is brought to you by Concise Software, one of Europe's leading software development agencies, with over 10 years of experience in web, mobile, and emerging technologies. So contact us to see how we can assist in ongoing work or help bring new projects to life.
Hi Armin, thanks a lot for joining us on this episode of Concise Conversations.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good morning, Robert.
So we know you've had quite a successful career that's culminated in you working for RideCell and then going on to do some of your own interesting projects. But it'd be really good to get an understanding of like how it all started, how you got into the industry, why you got into the industry, and how you developed along the path that you did.
Well, this I think I have to go back into the, let's say, mid '80s even. When I'm an engineer by education, telecommunications engineering. That's what I studied back in the '80s. So I was always very technical to start with, even when I was a teenager. So I loved kind of electronics and creating stuff. But then relatively early on, I realized I'm not going to be a good engineer, and I much more enjoy customer engagement, market engagement. So my career really went from being an engineer for about 2 years, then into kind of product management, and I spent the majority of my career, or the first part of my career, if I may say so, the, let's say, traditional hardware side of things.
Yeah.
The PC era. I mean, I've seen it all, right? And then I joined in 1992. I joined Compaq Computers in Munich. Some may remember that brand, right? They eventually got acquired by HP at some point later. But that was kind of a big step, and that was kind of when I got, I think, into, let's say, US company business culture, very result driven. Enjoyed it very much. Spent 8 years at Compaq in different positions. Was running product marketing at the end for the consumer division. Compaq Presarios was a famous brand back then. Yeah. And then from there on, I kind of moved more into the sales and general management kind of roles. Spent 2 years actually in the US, running the US operation for a German company.
Right.
At the time in the Silicon Valley. In fact, we moved over there in 2000, just before the bubble burst, with all the nice challenges which came with that. And then kind of in let me really quickly think. I think it was in 2005 actually. Yes, 2005 when I think I left the hardware business behind me and joined a software startup in Berlin.
Yeah.
By the name of Gate 5 at the time. Gate 5 a year later actually was sold to Nokia. Gate 5 was actually an app developer for location-based services, mobile apps in the mapping space. Which got acquired by Nokia then. The famous Nokia N95 back then was kind of coming with maps the first time. And that was the technology we actually had built at Gate 5. And then I stayed a couple of years in that space, run the European operation for a LBS technology company out of the Silicon Valley again. And that's pretty much what I've been doing since, kind of helping US companies getting a foothold in Europe and building the business here.
Wow. So that's, I think that's one of the interesting paths that you see, especially from people from your generation, because obviously you can't really plan too far ahead in terms of where your career is going to go, because you don't know where technology is going to be in 5 years or 10 years. So it's quite interesting and exciting to just like go along with it and then meet the challenges as they come.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think that's always been my kind of, I think, idea, if I may say so, right? Be opportunistic. Interesting enough, I think I never also, if I may say so, applied for a job. I was always asked to join.
Yeah, that's great.
Which is a good position to be in, right? So yeah, but honestly, haven't done much. Let's say longer term planning, right? Yeah. I mean, when we, just as an example, I mean, when we made this big decision at the time to move to the US with a family and 2 kids at the time.
Yeah.
That was from idea to execution 6 weeks.
Wow. So
right?
I mean, I'm sure your boss was telling you that was too slow, but that's pretty fast, even in the world of tech.
Yeah. So that's, and again, so I typically take opportunities as they come along. Yeah.
And that's, I think that's an interesting aspect as well, especially when you work for little startups, like the ability to kind of propel your career in an accelerated manner. You know, you start working at a small startup, you're solving all these problems, you get acquired, and then suddenly you're in a larger corporate structure and they try and crowbar you in, and you sometimes move up a few ranks that you otherwise wouldn't if you'd have gone through that route. Is that something you think as well?
Oh, I mean, you know, that's actually a good point, and I think that was very much true. I think when Gate 5 got acquired by Nokia, I mean, on day one after the acquisition, we became Nokia branded, Nokia phone, Nokia badge, Nokia everything, right? Yeah. And frankly speaking, I think we at the time lost quite a few people of the team because they didn't want to be part of this more corporate environment and culture, right? So yeah, and I think, you know, I think you have to make a choice at some point in your career, right? What do you enjoy more, right? Is it a corporate career or maybe a more sometimes risky, more crazy, you know, startup environment career for that sake? Yeah.
Well, you seem to have like shifted in and out of it. So it's not like you started in one and then migrated to the other. It's more like you went, right, do one, get an opportunity in another, and then move in and out. So it's not like, it feels like you settled on one area.
Well, I would partly disagree. I think you know, with Gate 5, I think, and also the different business being a software company, right, rather than a hardware company, I think from that onwards, I mean, I stayed around for another 2 years with Nokia because there was, literally speaking, a financial incentive to do so.
Sure.
Right? But I since I think the Gate 5 times, I enjoyed these smaller teams, right, less corporate, and I think that's why I've been doing what I've been doing so far. Yeah.
So, do you think that your career has mirrored the sort of trend where, like in the 80s and 90s, I mean, there wasn't that much you could do without hardware because, the hardware wasn't as connected as it was with the internet, and then suddenly those problems seem to have been solved, and then the next problems needed solving, which were how do you make this hardware communicate and provide services from that?
Yeah, and I think I've definitely seen the whole journey, right? As technology evolved, right? I mean, I still remember in fact, I mean, it's kind of a bit of an irony. I mean, when we lived in the Silicon Valley, per se, in 2000, 2001, right, I only had dial-up modem.
Wow. It's,
right?
it's hard to imagine, isn't it? Like, that was just 20 years ago. I mean, it's hard to imagine that 2001 was 20 years ago, and then you slot into that, the fact that there's only dial-up. It's like, what was going on?
Yeah, you know, and I still back then I had a Motorola StarTAC mobile phone, right? Which we all have seen, I think, you know, and I think, you know, and even if I go back a bit further, right? I mean, mobile phones weren't there when I was in my first tech jobs, right? I mean, we had what we called at the time car phones, which were kind of suitcase-sized pieces of technology with an analog connection, right? And you would lose the call multiple times while driving, right? So I think it's you know, and I sometimes say, you know, my let's say technical background goes as far back where I still understand how a basic transistor works, right?
Right.
And when you now look at the chip like an Apple M1, right, which has hundreds of millions of these transistors on a small footprint, it's hard to imagine, right, how this all works. But as I said, I mean, I have seen I have seen how technology evolved from very basic stuff to where we are today, right? Where we just do these video calls and it's all super quality and connectivity is not an issue and you know, and 5G and more to come, right? So
I mean, when you transitioned into the corporate space, what did you find most challenging about that then led you to think, you know what, I want to be more involved in more startup type activities?
Yeah, I think for me it's always difficult and that's probably my character and my DNA to kind of just follow rules.
Right.
You know, and I think in a corporate environment, it's very much about the process and you know, ISO certification and what have you, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm much more you know, and I have seen this also kind of, you know, when you see also how leadership, how to some degree leadership is done in corporates, you know, where you hear or see things like, there's a problem, someone should do something about it, right? So who is that someone and what's that something, right? You know, and that's what I like about being part of smaller teams where, you know, everyone has a common goal and it's not about the title and the hierarchy and whatever. It's more about getting the job done and having success, right?
Yeah. So one exciting aspect of your career that I thought was really interesting was working in the sort of connected car space and RideCell and everything. And it's for you, I'm sure it seems like it's like almost oldish technology now, but for a lot of people, this connected car concept is still like, you know, a new thing. So can you tell us a little bit more about that process and where you took it to and where you think it's going?
Yeah, and you know, and I think that's an interesting topic actually. I think if you're in the tech industry and in particular in that part, right, you take things for granted, right?
Yeah.
And the average user doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about, I think, connected cars in particular, I think the OEMs and I would even say the car OEMs, and I would specifically also call out the German ones, right? They may have not done a well enough job to communicate to the end user about all the benefits, right?
Yeah.
And I just give you one example, right? I mean, in the and this goes back also to kind of the mapping, navigation kind of I think environment, right? When navigation became available in cars, you typically had a CD or maybe later a DVD in your glove box, right? Which loaded the map data, right? You know, and I think when and eventually you bought a map update, right? A new
Yeah.
CD or DVD, and it was very expensive, 500 euros, whatever, right? To get the latest European map. And I think when connected cars came into play, I think what the automotive OEMs completely, I think, misunderstood is, or what they did is, now we don't need to ship a DVD or CD anymore. We can now do this digitally, but we're going to charge the same, right?
Yeah.
and at the same time, you have Google and Waze and even to an extent now with Apple Maps, right? To just have fresh maps at your fingertips anytime, and obviously connectivity is a prerequisite for that. But that's just one example where I think the automotive industry has tried to not disrupt, but just kind of evolve, and it's a slow process, right? Similar thing, I think, because I've been seeing so many things, right? Also in the telco industry, right? I mean, there was a time when companies like Deutsche Telekom or Vodafone wanted to get into the services and software and services business, right? And they were launching their own music service, they were launching their own mapping service, right? But at the end, today, they are just a data pipe, right? And I think that's what they're good at, and that's what they should focus on, right?
Yeah.
So I think there has been I think companies have tried to, again, generate new revenue streams through software and services, may have not been that successful with that, probably also because of a cultural issue. Their DNA wasn't quite there, right? And I think we see more and more now, again, companies just focusing on what their core competencies are.
Yeah, it's probably like, has an analogy to sort of like the telephone companies trying to own sort of internet spaces with walled gardens, didn't it? So the services around that didn't really explode until they just said, you know what, we are providing the connectivity, and other people built services on top of that.
Exactly.
Cool. So what did you think were the biggest cultural differences between when you were working in Silicon Valley and when you're working in Germany?
Well, it is the whole attitude, the can-do attitude, right?
Right.
Think big, right? Be bullish, take risk, right? I mean, and frankly speaking, I don't view myself as a typical German, because I just have been so international, and I lived in the US, and I mainly worked for US tech companies ever since, right? So that has a certain influence, on you. And I would bluntly say I would probably not join a typical German company anytime, right? Because of those issues. I mean, I have a bit of a reference with my wife. She works for a subsidiary of a large German insurance company, and it is what it is, if I may say so. But so really, I really enjoyed this can-do attitude, right? Of the U.S. tech companies. Not everything they do is right, and world domination is also not the ultimate thing you would want to support, right?
No.
But just in general, the risk-taking culture, failure is a a necessity almost, right? Because only from failures you learn, right? And I think the Germans in particular are just so risk averse. I mean, COVID is a good example also, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we just don't want to take any risk anymore, right? And we look at the government to take care of us, right? And it's kind of
Yeah, I think I see that. I think it's within the German culture, it's there, but I don't think it's as prevalent as you might think yourself, because you're embedded in the German culture. I think. And for me, what I saw as well, even coming from the UK, you might think that the UK is less sort of risk averse than Germany, but there's almost like on top of it all sits this tech layer that's international, and you can tap into it, and it doesn't matter where you're from, and it doesn't really matter where you're based. You just get involved in this sort of like world.
Exactly, and I think that's your choice, right? I think, or that's also my choice, right? I just I elevated myself into that kind of space. I would, if I may say so, yeah.
So it's exciting. So you're you're a family man. So have you been in the relationship throughout your career, and how has that been something that you feel has kind of impacted it, or has you felt like you've been able to progress with that?
Yeah, I am a family man, definitely. We just had our 30th anniversary, so
excellent! Congratulations.
We have 3 wonderful daughters from age 26 down to 19, and all I have been doing.
Yeah.
Moving to the job change, location change wouldn't have been possible with the support of my wife. I mean, that's just, you need to have that support. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Exactly. Well, that's great. And do you think it's that's had a positive influence, given sort of like your family and international experience and broadened horizons around that?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, this combination, I think, is having that experience and having had the family also abroad, right? And having you even though our kids were rather young at the time, right? But still, they get the influence, right? And you get much more open-minded, right? And I think that's certainly, everyone appreciates that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it, whether something's like definitely true or not, but I believe that that's an important value, that sort of open-mindedness and everything. So I guess that's why you're in that world.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, with COVID, I've been a very frequent traveler, right? And maybe too much, and probably not every flight was necessary at the end to have that meeting, right? I think we all learned that during COVID, but going from one extreme to the other, being kind of 15 months locked into your home office, right?
Yeah.
That was just hard.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any interesting themes that you see coming up within the tech world or your career that you think is going to be exciting and interesting as we move into the post-COVID world?
Yeah, I think again, technology is helping us a lot, right? I mean, we're doing this now, right?
Yeah.
Because technology allows us to do so, right?
Yeah.
At high quality, and I think there is that has certainly, I think, has changed also to some degree how we do business, maybe, right? In moving forward. Having said that, though, and I've just been at Mobile World Congress, right, last week, which was one of my first business trips ever since the lockdown.
Yeah.
And I think what I noticed is when you do Zoom meetings and whatever, right, it works up to a certain degree, but what's I think very helpful and valuable is when you actually get that local context, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I had a meeting last week at Mobile World Congress with someone, and we were talking about a topic which I personally experienced that morning, right? So if I wouldn't have experienced that exact problem, I wouldn't have had the context, right? And I think that's the piece which is missing when you just do video calls, right? Because you're missing that local context, obviously the socializing, having a nice dinner maybe with a business partner, right? But overall, I think we all have learned that technology can be leveraged much more than we probably have done in the past, right?
Yeah.
And that traveling or going to your office every morning and being stuck in traffic is not really necessary, and I think that's one of the big problems we're all facing, right? Traffic, shift in mobility. There was actually some interesting, I think, statistics just a week ago or so published in Germany that, in fact, In most cities in Germany, over the last year, traffic density didn't change much, so it stayed stable, except those cities where there is a strong automotive OEM presence, like in Munich, in Stuttgart, in Wolfsburg. And the rationale or the explanation was that, all these people who have company cars in these big corporates in those automotive cities, they were at the home office, right? and that's why there was much less traffic in those cities compared to cities where there is no automotive, right? So I think mobility is changing, I think, and has to change, right? And again, technology is helping with that a lot, right?
Are there any sort of like specific areas that you think are exciting to get into in the near future?
I mean, definitely. I mean, I'm involved in one project which is kind of early stage, still in stealth mode, I would say, right?
Sure.
Where it's all about, again, it's in the mobility space, and it's about safety, right? And I think vulnerable road users, right? I mean, there's just again, technology can help solve those problems once they're deployed at scale, right? And I think we're all gonna hopefully enjoy that in the not so distant future. So I think certainly in the mobility space in general, there is some big movements, and safety in particular is going to be I think one thing which has to be solved for good.
Have you got any? I mean, I don't know if you what feelings you've got on this, or what special insights you've got on this. But do you think any time in the near future that sort of like automated self-driving cars is going to be solved?
Oh yeah, I mean, I actually, if I look 10 years ahead of now, I hopefully be retired, right? And I guess I would enjoy being picked up by an autonomous pod or car or whatever, right? I think, I mean, we're still a bit. Maybe I think original expectations were more aggressive when this is going to happen, right? And obviously there is a lot of I think legislation and things to be concluded, but technology is there today, right? It's in fact, I mean, I think Mobileye is actually testing these days live in Munich, right? And then I think there's companies like Yandex from Russia, right, who have actually done an amazing job, even in bad weather conditions, right? There's one thing to have an autonomous car driving in Phoenix, Arizona, where the sun is always shining, right? And no bad weather conditions. But I think these more complex use cases or environments to manage is still a challenge, right? In fact, I think it's probably 2 years ago, I was at a conference where I actually was talking partially about autonomous, and some of the other speakers were all from the sensor business, like LiDAR, radar, right? And they were all talking about all the challenges, like, again, different weather conditions, light, whatever, right? Which still have to be solved. And you kind of sit there and you think, well, if you're driving your car yourself, right? You're literally using these two sensors, right? And this supercomputer called brain, right? And it's just amazing when you see the challenges that tech companies have to mimic that, right? And how much actually you're processing as a human being, at any given time. It's just amazing. I mean, it's kind of amazing. It's scary at the same time. Does it ever, is AI going to take over at some point? Hopefully not, right? So that's kind of it's going to happen, right? And hopefully by the time I retire, I actually can start enjoying these autonomous services.
That'll be nice, won't it, when you can just get your autonomous car to pick you up from the restaurant at the end of the night and have a few drinks instead
exactly.
of How do you find when you're like starting new projects? You know, how do you build new teams, and how do you find the right people, and how do you get like people from different disciplines that you don't really know that well to suddenly meld and work together?
You know, frankly speaking, that has been that is always a challenge, right? Luckily, and again, this is because of my, I guess, experience over the years. You know, you can draw from or can use your network quite a bit, right? So it's always easy when you can recruit people who you have worked with before, right?
Yeah.
You know them, you know their skills, you know their personality, you know, and I've seen this at RideCell, interestingly also, where, you know, we put a lot of effort in the interviewing process, right? And, you know, and multiple people from multiple departments, and really kind of an intense process, right? At the end of the day, you only start to know that person you hired once the person is working in your team, right?
Yeah.
And you still have made wrong choices, even though you have been going through a very intense process, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, you know, if I have the choice to, let's say, recruit from my network, that's always the first thing to do, right? And in fact, I mean, I briefly mentioned this new stealth venture company. You know, this actually is a group of people, right, who have all worked together in the past in some form or fashion, right?
Yeah.
And that just makes such a big difference, because again, there's no bullshit. We you know each other. You know, again, you've done it before, right? And that just makes things so easy to get started, right?
Yeah, I think for me, that's one of the interesting, exciting things about working in the tech industry and the startup world, is almost like people sort of like come together for a specific project for a short amount of time, and they get it going, and they move it to a place where it can almost live on its own, and then they kind of move away and then start the next thing up. And you know, this network of people is kind of fluid and flowing and leaving like good work behind them that's then taken on by hopefully other corporates, or you know, the business growing itself.
Exactly. You know, I mean, as a leader, you have done the best job when you have made yourself obsolete, right?
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, to a certain degree, right? So you know, and this is why I think, you know, I'm a big fan of, you know, empowering people. Don't micromanage them. Like, let them make mistakes, right? And really kind of, you know, provide clarity, right, on strategy, on problems even, right? I mean, the worst thing I have seen happening is when founders, CEOs in all hands meetings would, you know, an employee would raise a critical issue, and I mean, all hands internal meetings are for that purpose, to speak up if there's an issue, right? And I have seen it couple of times where, you know, people being shut down. You know, we talk about this offline. It's never been really addressed, and that just creates frustration, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm also a big advocate of kind of leading by example, right? Because in particular in the startup world, and I'm not an entrepreneur per se, right? I mean, I've worked in startups. I typically get hired into startups, right? But I have never founded a company per se, or a startup, but the cult. There's actually also one key learning I had over the years. Culture always wins, right?
Right.
And cultural fit is extremely important, right? And if there is no cultural fit, and that can actually be a process over time where, you know, the leadership team isn't able to have this kind of unified culture, or you have subcultures in different departments, right? That's just bad, right? And leading by example, I think is a very key, I think, thing for me. Again, I give an example. I mean, if your CEO is always late to meetings, right? at some point, everyone else is going to be late to meetings, right? And then software releases are going to be late, and and then you have a late culture, right? Established, right?
Yeah.
Because it's very much the CEO who defines and drives the culture, so.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes as well something that people think that someone's not doing their job that well, but the real problem is they don't fit into the culture, and at that point you've got to, as quickly as possible, say like, look, just this is not the right fit. It's like you can do a good job but not here, and it's better the sooner rather than later that you move somewhere where you fit into their culture, and we get someone who fits into our culture, and maybe they're not as competent as you are at the specifics of the job, but they will do a better, valuable job because they fit in better with the culture.
Exactly, and again, I think once you conclude, and that's true for both sides, right, for the company and you as an individual, if one of each kind of concludes, well, it doesn't fit, right? There's nothing wrong with that per se, right?
Yeah.
Then you just need to take the appropriate actions and take a corrective action, maybe, right? And it might be as bad as you let the person go, right?
Yeah.
If or vice versa, you as the person, you just make a decision to leave, right? And look for something where you fit better from a cultural point of view.
So I'd like to we're going to move on to ask you about some of our concise conversation first date questions in a minute. Before we do, I'd just like to touch upon some of your like fun past that you had, where you used to work in music, and you were a semi-professional keyboard player, fully professional keyboard player. I don't know. Could you
see my.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and how what you enjoyed about it, and any funny experiences you had with it?
I mean, again, I think it all started with my interest in technology, right? Back then, in the 80s, right, when synthesizers became the thing, right, and synth pop as a genre, and I was always interested in that piece of the technology, and given my technical background, obviously I had a bit of an advantage, right?
Yeah.
And it ultimately turned from a hobby into financing my time at university, and I never had to worry about money at the time, right?
That's brilliant.
And I think the best thing you can do is if you do something for, I mean, I didn't do it for a living, but if you do something which just is fun at the same time, right? That's the best of both worlds you can have. So yeah, I did that. And I still today have a little kind of recording studio in my basement, right? Although there's not much time these days to actually spend time, but I still enjoyed the tech part of it. Yeah.
And you've got to be releasing an album at some point in the near future, or not?
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe.
Maybe. Don't give us a definite no. Maybe is great.
Maybe, right. Yeah.
So when you were doing that, was it like you'd turn up at discotheques and play live music at discotheques, or was it at parties?
No, it was mainly private parties, kind of wedding,
right.
That type of, sometimes with a small combo band, right? But mostly kind of solo basically, yeah, and barely covering songs basically, right? I mean that's I never got into the writing my own songs, but
right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for talking about that. Hopefully you did show us a picture of it, so we'll hopefully put that up to see what you looked like when you were doing that. So yeah, on Concise Conversations, at the end of the conversation, we like to just get to know our guests a little bit better with the Concise Conversations first date questions. Are you happy to do that?
Oh yeah, very, very, very happy. I mean, I mean, this is even entertaining, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So first things first, we always like to understand what our guest's first computer was.
Yeah, well, that goes way back to what was called the Commodore VC20.
Right.
which was having this massive storage of 3.5 kilobyte of RAM, and once you completed your coding of your basic program and you switched it off, it was all gone, and then, and you kind of you have to redo it. That's how I got started, and eventually, I think the next iteration was an Atari 1040 ST at the time. Which was in particular, I think it was the first computer who had what was called at the time a MIDI interface, which was basically this digital interface to control the synthesizer, right? And it's still a standard today. I mean, that's amazing. That standard still exists today, and it's still the same physical plug. Right? It's kind of 50 years old almost, right? And it's still the thing. And then more or less through my I think professional career, I got into the Windows, Wintel kind of camp. But then some years back, I made the switch to Mac, and I don't regret it.
I find it interesting because it's interesting that those were your first computers, and I'm a bit younger than you. And I was aware of those computers, and I was aware of sort of like either people in my family or like brothers of my friends or dads of my friends having them. And then I kind of got them, and my first computer was like a Commodore 64, but I was only like 7. And I just feel like it would have been, for you, like getting that computer a bit older, it would have been interesting for me to have been like coding in BASIC when I was sort of like 14 or 15, like this new frontier of like using computers. I just felt like I missed that. Did you did you enjoy that process, and how did you find it?
I was just always curious about these things, right? I think that's what drove my interest, curiosity, how these things work and what can you do with them, and again, as I said, I had this connection between, again, let's say the music, my hobby, and computers, and how these things come together, right? And that was again, I would actually, I mean, I was once reprogramming the sample database of this computers or this keyboards drum sounds, right? Where I was really kind of hacking the system and reprogrammed it, and because I wanted to have better sounds, right? So that's how crazy I would go.
And didn't you build your own tape recording facility to save programs on it as well?
Well, yeah, I actually did. Back then, there was no floppy disk, right? Not on those computers. Yeah, so you had to kind of, at some point, you get tired of retyping your program every time you switch on or switch off the computer and switch it on again, right? And then, I did this little data interface to talk to my basic tape recorder and basically record or save those programs then on music tapes.
Yeah, it's quite interesting as well, because Steve Wozniak I don't know if you've seen it, Steve Wozniak's just released something talking about similar things, how the right to repair movement is coming out, and he's saying like, unless people are able to repair things and play with these technologies, you're not going to get the next generation of really skilled engineers who will want to break things and put it back together.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
So, next question. What so far has been your favorite piece of software or app that you think has given you most value in your life?
Well, most recently, I think over the last maybe 2 years, because as I said, I've become a Mac user on any screen. Also obviously iPad. So at some point, I think I dropped my physical notebook, like note taking, right? And I'm actually using, and that's probably my favorite one. Notability is one of these handwriting note taking apps on the iPad, and it's and it's on. You can read it on your iPhone. It's on your desktop, right? And it's just always in sync. So I just take my notes there, and then actually I find stuff again, because my problem always was that you take all these notes in your notebook, right? And my handwriting is really bad. And then you can't find anything anymore, right? And it's all indexed, and so that's probably my most favorite productivity I think, app on any of these screens.
And now, because you don't lose any of it, you have to read through all your amazing ideas that you have when you've had a few drinks late at night. That's the big...
Exactly. Yeah.
So were you ever a gamer? Is there a game that you remember from when you were younger that really captured your imagination, or maybe you spent too much time playing?
Well, actually, I was never a gamer. Actually, that's
No.
the one thing I completely kind of, because I was if I had my free time, I was focused on my music, right?
Okay. Yeah,
That was my gaming. And I mean, again, I never, even today, I don't. I mean, maybe I play a bit of Tetris, maybe,
Right.
but really not a gamer at all, not at all.
That's fair enough. Are you using any specific music software at the moment? What's your
Steinberg Cubase.
Cubase still?
That's been on my Atari back then, right? And
that's been around forever.
And it's still on my Mac. I mean, there's a little also. I mean, in one of my previous roles, when I was actually the general manager of Pinnacle Systems, we actually acquired back then Steinberg.
Okay, nice.
Because we Pinnacle was about video and video editing and broadcasting, and we felt we needed this kind of music production tools to complement the offering, and we actually acquired Steinberg back then. Eventually, they got sold off again to Yamaha, the Japanese music instrument company, right? But yeah, so I had quite some insights there, and I just love their products, and I've been a loyal user.
That's great. The same software and the same port, still doing the same thing. You know, that's survived the generations more than any. If you had to spend 6 months abroad in another country that you've or city that you've not lived in so far, where do you think you'd like to go and why?
South Africa.
South Africa, nice.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to South Africa?
I mean, I had the pleasure, and I got lucky during one of my previous roles that I actually had to do some business down there, right? And I've been, I think, in 2012, 2013, I spent a lot of time recruiting customers and finding business partners, and Cape Town in particular, right? I mean, I just love the food, the ocean, the wine, the people there. We went on vacation. I think there's 2016. My wife and my youngest, they both enjoyed it very much. So yeah, that's one of my. I always describe it like it has the kind of environmental, close to the water wine thing like California does, right? Yeah. But it's much more affordable.
Yeah. I had an interesting experience with Cape Town. There was January 2019 and January 2020. I had 2 weddings that I had to attend, and they were both in Cape Town. So I did 2 January weddings 2 years in a row. So I think, I really think that's an excellent choice. And as for the reasons that you said, it's just an interesting, wonderfully rich, sort of beautiful environment. And it's strange that it's not more successful than it actually is right now as an economy and as a country.
Yeah, and I think there is mostly, I guess, political reasons for that, right? I think the last president, who I think now is in jail, right? Probably hasn't done the country a big favor. So, and too much corruption probably, and these kind of things. But yeah, otherwise, and I think most people have the wrong impression about South Africa. I mean, certainly, in Joburg, and it's more dangerous, right? But with all the traveling I have ever done there, I've never experienced anything but friendly people. So.
And the good thing is, if you were there for 6 months, you'd probably sort all the problems out as well. So that'd be great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. One thing we like to ask is, the There's room 101, but on Concise Conversations we have room 202, which is even worse than room 101. And we'd just like to ask you, if you could, is there a piece of technology out there that you would put into room 202?
Oh, well, maybe not technology, but I would put German bureaucracy in the room too, if I may say so. and for that sake, if technology, then the completely over-engineered, overpriced German Corona app.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's it pretty much. Yeah.
That's interesting to say, because I guess you tend to look at these things like contextually, and from the UK we just think, oh, I can't believe we spent so much money on our Corona app. No other country would be stupid enough to spend that much money. I bet the Germans didn't do that. And then you're probably thinking the same thing and like, oh, I bet the Brits never wasted all that money. Yeah, all governments wasted all this money on all the different coronavirus apps, apparently.
I think in Germany we were just too concerned about data privacy, right?
Yeah.
And I think the conclusion is, and at least in my mind, right, it was not designed to protect people from Corona. It was designed to protect people from data piracy.
Yeah, it's like you know, you're not going to get any spam emails, but you are going to get coronavirus. So
right.
You know.
Yeah.
And then this is the last question that we always ask our guests, and what we think is the most important thing to know about someone. What is your favorite keyboard shortcut?
Well, it's very simple. I think there's only two really. It's Control C and Control V. Yes, I mean. Right. I mean. Yeah. And actually, I'm not at all into keyboard shortcuts, and probably because I've never. I mean, I think if you're a gamer, you're much more. I think into that, right? You know, Control C, Control V. That's probably the most used, and if you would analyze, I guess, my keystrokes, that's what's going to be the outcome. Cheers. Bye.